Hello, everyone. Over the past decade, the mere mention of Chicago instantly brings to mind iconic names and images like Chief Keef, Lil Durk, 63rd Street, GDs, BDs, Zach TV, King Von, G Herbo, or Polo G. Yes, the name Chicago has now become synonymous with drill music and a chaotic, seemingly inescapable lifestyle. But behind all of that lies another layer of stories, ones that many people have yet to uncover. In reality, Chicago is a city of mysteries, diversity, and rich history. It boasts luxurious neighborhoods, peaceful middle-class areas, and of course, poverty-stricken, danger-filled districts. But more importantly, Chicago is not just a city shrouded in darkness. It also houses some of the wealthiest and most expensive zip codes in the U.S., mainly concentrated in its downtown and northern areas. In stark contrast, the southern and western neighborhoods present an entirely different picture, one that has persisted for decades. Today we'll dive into a story about a gang that many may not have heard of, but whose influence surpasses that of the mafia, the GDs or the BDs combined. This is the story of the Latin Kings, a gang that turned Chicago into its own kingdom. But before we delve into the dark secrets, let's first rewind and revisit history. To truly understand this tale, we need to travel back to the early 20th century. Starting in the 1920s, a wave of Latinx migrants from Texas began arriving in Chicago, primarily seeking work in steel mills and settling into neighborhoods near these industrial sites. The city's south side, where the packing house industry thrived, became a hub for the Latinx community. Meanwhile, railroad workers found their home on the west side. Over time, the Latinx community expanded across Chicago. However, this growth slowed as states like California and Texas offered better job opportunities. Economic instability and harsh weather conditions also discouraged further migration for a period. Things changed in the 1950s when a new wave of Latinx migrants returned, but this time they were not from Texas or California, they came from Puerto Rico. From 1950 onwards, tens of thousands of Puerto Ricans began migrating to Chicago, with many settling in Humboldt Park. Within just a few years, the area transformed into a predominantly Puerto Rican community. Division Street quickly became the heart of this community, lined with Puerto Rican-owned restaurants, grocery stores, and countless businesses. However, lurking in the shadows, an underworld began to take shape. This leads us to the year 1954, the starting point of our story, with a man named Ramon Santos, better known as Papa King. Papa King wasn't an ordinary man. He was ambitious, harboring grand dreams of building a powerful empire where he could control everything: money, power, and respect. With this vision in mind, he founded a gang in 1954 called the Latin Kings. But the name wasn't chosen randomly. To Papa King, it carried a profound meaning, reflecting the structure of the gang he envisioned: a monarchy with the king at the top, ruling over princes and countless soldiers. Each tier had its own responsibilities, and every member was bound to an unshakable, strict order. This was the foundation of what would become one of the most notorious gangs in American history. Papa King didn't merely aim to create a gang, he sought to build a covert and highly influential empire that would dominate the city. To this day, information about the Latin Kings remains scarce, and few truly understand the scope of their operations. Even historians debate Papa King's origins. Was he truly a resident of 18th Street or the south side of the city? Rather than simply recruiting members, Papa King established a rigorous initiation system with 3 distinct phases, each a brutal and bloody test of loyalty and resilience. Phase 1, the novice. The first stage, known as the novice, required recruits to perform grueling, high-risk tasks. But surprisingly, joining the Latin Kings demanded more than just courage. It also came with a unique requirement: a high school diploma. Rumor has it that Papa King didn't impose this condition because he cared about education. Instead, he wanted to weed out the weak-willed, those who lacked perseverance and easily gave up in the face of adversity. A diploma symbolized commitment and seriousness, proving that the individual had the discipline to overcome challenges. Papa King believed that high school graduation was a turning point. Many potential recruits might choose to abandon the gang life in favor of a stable job or other aspirations. But for those who crossed this threshold, there would be no turning back. Phase 2, the mummy. Once a recruit completed the novice phase, they faced two choices in the second phase, the mummy. This stage allowed members to withdraw from the gang honorably, provided they fulfilled specific conditions. They had to prove they had secured steady employment and started a family. Only then could they leave with respect, having served their duties without betraying the organization. Phase 3, the new king. For those who chose to stay, the third phase awaited, the new king. This was the most critical and defining moment, marking the beginning of lifelong loyalty to the Latin kings. At this stage, members became full-fledged kings in the gang's underworld, dedicating their entire existence to the Latin kings. They lived, breathed, and operated according to the king's spirit, adhering to a strict code. Any violation resulted in severe punishment, including the infamous 3-minute discipline, an internal penalty that was brutal, unrelenting, and far from a joke. Betrayal in any form was utterly unforgivable. In a city as chaotic and crime-ridden as Chicago, the Latin kings evolved into a massive underground empire. They didn't just rule the streets, they posed a serious threat to even the most powerful rival forces. One of the most critical aspects of the Latin kings was their signature colors, black and gold. These weren't just arbitrary choices, they carried profound meaning tied to the gang's identity. Black symbolized darkness, crime, secrecy, and the hidden nature of their operations. It represented the shadowy life the gang embraced. In contrast, gold stood for light, prosperity, strength, and the power they sought to achieve. It was a symbol of the ultimate goals they aspired to, wealth and dominance over the city. However, as the Latin kings expanded their power, a formidable threat began to rise. A new rival emerged, ready to challenge their dominance and potentially overthrow their reign. This looming confrontation would shape the future of Chicago's underworld, leaving its streets gripped by tension and uncertainty. The rise of Ambrose and the blood-soaked streets of Chicago. In the 1960s, within Chicago's West Side neighborhood of Pilsen, a group of Mexicans gave birth to a gang that would rise to prominence, the Ambrose Gang. Rapidly growing in strength and influence, Ambrose quickly became the primary rival to the Latin kings. During this time, a clear divide began forming among the city's street gangs. The Latin kings aligned themselves with the Black Peace Stones, while Ambrose joined forces with the gangster disciples, GDs. The rivalry between these factions tore Chicago apart, turning every corner into a battlefield. Bloodshed and violence became unavoidable as the city was fractured into warring territories. Yet much of the gang warfare's details remained shrouded in mystery, erased by the passage of time. This story took a dramatic turn in 1971 with an event that forever altered the Latin king's trajectory. At the center of this moment was a 16-year-old boy whose fate would become intertwined with the gang's rise to infamy. His name was Gustavo Colon, known by the nickname Gino. A rebellious teenager with a desperate need to prove himself, Gino found himself quickly drawn into the deadly orbit of gang life. On June 27th, 1971, at approximately 1 p.m., Gino and a fellow gang member stood on the corner of Levitt Street in West Chicago. Their quiet observation was interrupted when they spotted a group of teenagers walking by. Among them was 14-year-old Nathaniel Burr, who caught the attention of Gino's senior. With a simple yet chilling command, the older gang member ordered Gino, "Go across the street and do what you have to do." Without hesitation, Gino crossed the street and approached Nathaniel. Within moments, a gunshot rang out. Bang! Nathaniel collapsed to the ground, his blood staining the pavement. Gino fled the scene, running home as if nothing had happened. That evening, the police arrived at Gino's doorstep. Witnesses had provided clear descriptions of both him and his accomplice. Within hours, Gino was arrested and thrust into the legal system. During Gino's trial, his attorney argued that Nathaniel Burr wasn't an innocent bystander, but a member of the rival Vice Lord's gang. The court, however, dismissed this defense. In the end, Gino was sentenced to 27 years in prison. For many, such a long sentence would mean being forgotten by the gang, as loyalty in the underworld often depends on what a member can contribute in the moment. Yet, Gino's story didn't end there. In fact, it was only just beginning. Following Gino's imprisonment, the Latin kings faced turmoil not solely because of his absence, but due to a deeper issue: drugs. The gang's members, including their leader Ramon Santos, had succumbed to addiction, plunging the organization into chaos. The situation spiraled so far out of control that 7 key members drafted a manifesto exposing the gang's internal problems and demanding new rules to restore order. These changes led to an unprecedented outcome. Papa King was stripped of his power. Without a leader at the helm, the Latin Kings were thrown into a power vacuum. A fierce covert struggle erupted as candidates vied for the position of leadership. The new leader would need resilience, bravery, and the ability to command respect in a world defined by violence and crime. Astonishingly, the gang chose 17-year-old Gino as their leader, even though he was serving time in prison. Despite his confinement, Gino's influence was undeniable, and he quickly became the symbol of the gang's future. Under Gino's leadership, the Latin Kings didn't just survive, they became bolder and more aggressive than ever. From his prison cell, Gino orchestrated the gang's resurgence, cementing his legacy as a pivotal figure in the bloody history of Chicago's underworld. Driven by the ambition to make the Latin Kings the largest and most feared gang in America, Gino implemented a groundbreaking decision, removing the requirement that members be of Puerto Rican descent. This decision instantly widened the gang's reach, drawing in thousands of new recruits from diverse communities. Like any criminal organization, money was the lifeblood of the Latin Kings. They were involved in a wide range of illegal activities, including audacious heists targeting banks, jewelry stores, and any lucrative opportunity they could exploit. Meticulous planning and flawless execution often allowed them to pull off these robberies undetected. However, as their profits soared, they faced a pressing issue: the difficulty of using dirty money for significant transactions. To solve this problem, Gino and the Latin Kings began investing in legitimate businesses across Chicago. Their first venture was a small grocery store located at the corner of Rockwell and Hirsch. From there, they expanded to nightclubs, car washes, and restaurants, all operated by family members of the gang. These legitimate fronts not only laundered their illegal earnings, but also solidified their presence in the community. But as the flow of legitimate money increased, the Latin Kings set their sights on an even more ambitious goal. Petty robberies no longer satisfied their hunger for power and wealth. Their next target, a military weapons depot. With their headquarters situated directly across from an Illinois National Guard armory, the gang meticulously planned a daring operation over several years. Their target was the armory's weapons stockpile. On April 10th, 1978, the plan came to fruition. A gang member monitored the armory all day, waiting for the opportune moment. When a military vehicle left the depot, the Latin Kings sprang into action. As the vehicle turned a corner, gang members rushed out from a nearby house and surrounded it. The driver, realizing the danger, had no choice but to surrender. Like a well-oiled machine, the Latin Kings seized the vehicle and transported it to a hidden garage. This was the largest operation in the gang's history, a defining moment that solidified their power and limitless ambition. When the stolen military truck was opened inside the secret garage, the gang members were stunned. Inside was a trove of military-grade equipment worth over $100,000, a fortune in 1978 equivalent to over $400,000 today. The haul included advanced weapons and tools far exceeding their expectations. Disturbingly, the heist was never resolved, and the stolen weapons allegedly remained in circulation on Chicago's streets for years. A former member of the Latin Kings even claimed that some of this military-grade equipment can still be found in the city today. This wasn't a scene from an online game, it was the grim reality of Chicago. The Latin Kings not only ruled the streets, but extended their reach into the prison system, creating a chilling environment where even law enforcement struggled to maintain control. One of the most infamous prisons was Stateville Correctional Center in Joliet, Illinois, known as one of America's most dangerous and notorious facilities. Stateville housed the worst of the worst. It was a living hell, where even the prison guards feared for their lives. And among the many threats within its walls, the Latin Kings stood out as the most menacing force. In 1989, Lawrence Cush, a newly hired corrections officer, began working at Stateville. Known for his strict, no-nonsense approach, Cush quickly gained a reputation for being incorruptible and diligent. But his integrity made him an enemy of the Latin Kings. In an environment they controlled with an iron grip, someone like Cush posed a serious threat to their dominance. They couldn't allow such a principled figure to stand against them. What followed was a harrowing confrontation between a man determined to uphold the law and a gang willing to stop at nothing to maintain their power. Gino, the leader of the Latin Kings, decreed that Lawrence Kush must disappear, summoning a secret meeting with 3 of his most loyal members. He issued the chilling order: eliminate the prison guard. However, the 3 men hesitated upon hearing the command. They were willing to intimidate Kush, but not to carry out a violent attack. Sensing their wavering resolve, Gino stood, his gaze icy and commanding. With a voice devoid of mercy, he declared that disobedience would mark them as his enemies. Cornered and terrified, the 3 had no choice but to comply. On July 1st, 1989, during the prison yard recreation time, the 3 gang members surrounded Lawrence Kush. What began as intimidation escalated into a brutal attack. In a flurry of violence, Kush was left bloodied and motionless. The attack was swift, savage, and final. The aftermath was grim. All 3 perpetrators were sentenced to life in prison for the assault. But the story didn't end there. Consumed by guilt, the attackers began to reflect on their actions. They realized they had been mere pawns in Gino's ruthless game. Seeking redemption, they confessed the full truth to the authorities, hoping to bring an end to the Latin King's bloody reign. When investigators raided Gino's cell, they uncovered a damning piece of evidence: a list of prison guards with Lawrence Kush's name ominously marked with an X. Though the list strongly implicated Gino, it was not enough to convict him. Within the prison walls, Gino wielded power comparable to the warden. The harsh reality became clear. The Latin King's members were not warriors fighting for honor, but expendable pawns, discarded or destroyed if they dared defy orders. While Chicago remained their stronghold, the Latin King's influence soon reached New York City. In 1990, the gang began expanding into Sunset Park, Brooklyn, a lucrative territory for illicit profits, but a perilous battleground where a single mistake could mean death. New recruits in New York had no idea they were joining one of the most vicious gangs in America. Meanwhile, the leaders from Chicago were unprepared for the vastly different environment they would face. Unlike Chicago, where gang activities often went unchecked, New York City was heavily policed. The NYPD, armed with advanced surveillance and cybersecurity tools, monitored every call, transaction, and bank account tied to the gang. Between 1992 and 1994, Sunset Park became a graveyard for the Latin Kings. 7 members met violent ends in brutal internal purges. Initially, the leaders believed rival gangs were responsible, but NYPD investigations revealed the chilling truth. These were executions ordered by the Latin Kings themselves. The reasons for these murders were as petty as they were terrifying: failure to follow orders, incomplete tasks, or even voicing dissent. These events highlighted a horrifying reality. In the world of the Latin Kings, even the slightest betrayal was punishable by death. In 1994, the NYPD launched a massive RICO operation targeting the Latin Kings. The crackdown resulted in numerous arrests, with 33 members sentenced to life imprisonment. Court testimonies exposed the gang's horrific internal purges, where members were killed for as little as a single act of defiance. After serving 26 years in Stateville Prison, Gino Colon, the infamous leader of the Latin Kings, was granted early parole. He convinced the court of his reformation, citing a GED, completed college courses, and a stable job awaiting him on the outside. But just days before his scheduled release, a shocking revelation emerged, one that would change everything. On September 19th, 1997, Gino and his wife were arrested on 12 serious charges. What shocked everyone was the revelation that, even while incarcerated, Gino had been running a multi-million-dollar criminal empire based in Chicago. His wife acted as the operational head, managing a drug and weapons trafficking ring that generated an annual revenue of $6 million. From his prison cell, Gino issued orders through monitored phone calls which his wife relayed to the Latin Kings. But this intricate system ultimately became his downfall. Chicago police had been monitoring Gino's every call, exploiting his misplaced confidence in the laxity of the prison surveillance system. The truth unraveled, and both Gino and his wife were convicted. While his wife served her sentence and was released relatively quickly, Gino faced a much longer term behind bars. His arrest sent a strong message from Chicago law enforcement to the Latin Kings. We control this city. However, this apparent victory didn't mark the end of the Latin Kings. Though temporarily weakened, but the gang's power and influence endured, proving that such a deeply rooted criminal organization couldn't be easily dismantled. From 1997 onward, the Latin Kings not only survived, but expanded their reach. By the late 1990s, the gang operated in 41 states across the U.S. with an estimated 25,000 to 30,000 members. Though they suffered a significant defeat in New York, Gino and the remaining leaders demonstrated that criminal empires don't die. They adapt and evolve. The Latin Kings adopted more discreet and calculated strategies, moving away from the overt violence that had defined their early years. Their activities became shrouded in secrecy, but their power remained undeniable, extending beyond U.S. borders. From Ecuador to Mississippi, California to Spain, the Latin Kings transformed from a local street gang into a sophisticated global crime network, prioritizing profit over senseless confrontations. Beneath this facade of sophistication, Chicago remained a hot spot of tension. In May and June 2020, amidst nationwide protests, the Latin Kings seized the opportunity to assert their dominance. They mobilized to defend their territories, which stretched from Little Village to Humboldt Park and even into the city's southern neighborhoods. This decision plunged them into violent clashes with rival gangs like the GDs, BDs, and Folks. The resulting bloodshed exacerbated the already volatile state of a city long accustomed to violence. Despite the dark legacy of the Latin Kings, a beacon of hope emerged from the shadows of Chicago. A young rapper known as King Ace, a former Latin Kings member, began making waves in the hip-hop world. King Ace's journey from gang life to the music industry captured widespread attention. His talent and story of transformation inspired many, offering a rare glimpse of redemption in a world steeped in crime. Once known as a notorious figure in the gang, he now sought to carve out a new identity, using his platform to shed light on the possibility of change for others still trapped in the gang's shadow. The rise of King Ace raises questions. Is this a true turning point for the Latin Kings, or merely a fleeting story of defiance against a deeply entrenched system? Will the gang's influence continue to spread, or will this spark ignite a larger movement for change? In the early 1950s, the northwest side of Chicago, once home to Greek, Italian, and Eastern European communities, began experiencing a dramatic transformation. Poor neighborhoods saw an influx of Puerto Rican migrants, painting a drastically different cultural and social landscape. Amid the challenges of survival, these communities started forming gangs to protect themselves from growing threats. In 1954, Ramon Santos, known as Papa King, a man with ambitious dreams, founded the Latin Kings, a decision that would reshape Chicago's underworld. Ramon structured the gang around a monarchic hierarchy, where absolute loyalty and obedience to superiors were non-negotiable. His goal extended beyond safeguarding his community. He aspired to dominate Chicago, creating the city's most organized and secretive gang. As rival groups like the Latin Disciples emerged, Papa King resolved to make the Latin Kings the supreme force. He adopted black and gold as the gang's official colors, black symbolizing darkness and crime, while gold represented light and prosperity. These contrasting symbols embodied the dual nature of their ambitions: power through fear and unity through shared purpose. Through Papa King's relentless vision, the Latin Kings grew into one of Chicago's most formidable and feared gangs during the 1960s and 1970s. Brutal clashes with rival gangs such as the Ambrose, Black Pea Stones, and Latin Disciples plunged the streets into chaos. Chicago's neighborhoods became relentless battlegrounds with violent turf wars, leaving a trail of destruction. Despite the risks, thousands were drawn to the Latin Kings, finding a sense of family and unwavering loyalty within the gang. Their motto, Amor de Rey, love of the king, encapsulated the bond Papa King had fostered since the gang's inception. Initially, the Latin Kings exclusively recruited Puerto Rican members, but over time, they began welcoming people from other Latin American countries. The gang expanded its influence not only across Chicago, but also into Havana, Cuba, By 1976, a major shift occurred in Cuba when Fidel Castro rose to power. His sweeping reforms sparked widespread fear, leading millions to flee the country in search of safer opportunities. This migration unfolded in two waves. The first wave consisted of wealthier Cubans escaping to Miami to start anew, while the second wave was marked by desperate attempts, including makeshift rafts with only a fraction surviving the perilous journey. On April 15, 1980, Castro made an unexpected announcement, permitting some Cubans to leave. However, this so-called freedom was selective. Those allowed to leave were individuals Castro deemed undesirable. Among them was Luis Felipe, a 17-year-old serving a 10-year prison sentence. Unbeknownst to his captors, Felipe was not supposed to be released. Yet he was freed and sent to the United States under the guise of being a refugee. The American government, unaware of Felipe's criminal past, offered him refuge and arranged for his relocation to Chicago. What seemed like a chance at redemption marked the beginning of a dark and unpredictable journey. Felipe's arrival in Chicago was a crossroads for both him and the city. A storm brewing on the horizon that would change lives and destinies forever. Luis arrived in Chicago during the frigid days of winter, penniless and without a single acquaintance. Nights were spent seeking shelter beneath overpasses, forgotten places where no one bothered to look. His life at the time was a constant battle to survive, scraping together any means to make it through another day. It was in those bleak moments that Luis crossed paths with members of the Latin Kings. A strange sense of belonging stirred within him, as though he had finally found a place where he truly fit. From the outset, Luis worked relentlessly to prove himself as a standout member of the gang. He didn't just pass the initiation tests, he crushed them with lightning speed, leaving others in awe and fear. Rumors spread quickly. Within his first year in the gang, Luis had caused more destruction than any other member in Chicago. His daring and reckless actions earned him the nickname King Blood, a name that struck terror into the hearts of the city's residents. Even law enforcement wasn't immune to the fear he inspired. The Chicago Police Department was forced to assemble a special task force dedicated solely to tracking his every move. But Luis's actions were drawing attention not just from the police, but also from rival gangs. As his growing notoriety began to endanger the entire Latin Kings organization, a difficult decision was made. Luis would leave Chicago and go into hiding for a while to minimize the risk to the gang. In 1981, Luis Felipe relocated to the Bronx, New York, hoping for a quieter life. For a time, it seemed like peace was within reach as he began to settle down with his girlfriend. But a sudden outburst of rage led to a catastrophic decision, one that could never be undone. The tragic result was his girlfriend's death, and Luis found himself sentenced to 9 years in prison. The details of the incident remained shrouded in mystery, but one thing was certain. He bore the responsibility for the devastating outcome. In March 1982, Luis was transferred to Collins Correctional Facility, a notorious prison housing some of the most dangerous criminals. Survival here required strength, resilience, and cunning, traits Luis had honed in the brutal streets of Cuba long before arriving in the U.S. But even in a place where danger lurked at every corner, Luis quickly realized a harsh truth. As a lone individual, he was no match for the strength and numbers of organized groups. One thing became glaringly obvious to him. There was a glaring lack of unity among Latino inmates in the facility. Back in Chicago, the Latin Kings had been a dominant force. In New York, however, the gang was virtually non-existent. Luis decided it was time to change that. No longer content to sit on the sidelines, he began laying the groundwork for a New York chapter of the Latin Kings. He gathered dozens of Latino inmates and shared his vision of what the Latin Kings could offer: protection, power, and unwavering brotherhood. His words resonated deeply, and one by one, they pledged their allegiance. Under Luis's leadership, the Latin Kings quickly established themselves as a force to be reckoned with within Collins Correctional Facility. They began to control key aspects of prison life, solidifying their influence. But their power didn't stop at the prison walls. When members of the gang were released, they carried their unbreakable loyalty and connection to the Latin Kings back into society. This allowed the gang's reach to grow far beyond the confines of the prison. In time, the Latin Kings expanded throughout New York, becoming a formidable presence under the unyielding leadership of Luis Felipe. By 1990, thousands of members donning the distinctive black and gold colors of the Latin Kings dominated New York City streets. Their presence struck fear into the hearts of enemies, and even the police begrudgingly acknowledged their power. The gang wasn't content with merely controlling territory, they instilled terror, wielding their brutality to claim dominance. Under the unrelenting leadership of Luis Felipe, the Latin Kings became more than just a criminal organization. They were a fearsome force that left the city trembling. Their mission was simple: to take everything at any cost. Violence was not just a tool, but a necessity. A brutal reality they embraced to secure their position. No rival gang, not even New York's most entrenched underground groups, could stand against them. And at the center of it all was Luis Felipe. Despite being imprisoned, but Luis maintained his iron grip over the gang, ruling from his cell through a steady stream of letters. These weren't mere messages, they were directives, commands to carry out missions, and sometimes violent acts meant to send a message or solidify loyalty. The members obeyed without question, knowing the cost of defiance. As the Latin Kings expanded their influence, they became increasingly aggressive. Every street, every corner, and every block was divided and controlled with precision. New gangs weren't allowed to emerge on their turf, and their dominance extended far beyond New York City, creating ripple effects that would lead to unexpected bloodshed. The Latin Kings' influence reached El Salvador, a nation already devastated by decades of brutal civil war. By the late 20th century, the country was in ruins, leaving hundreds of thousands of Salvadorans with no choice but to flee. Seeking refuge in the U.S., many arrived in California, while others settled in New York, particularly in Long Island. This migration brought nearly 990,000 Salvadorans to the area, most of whom took jobs in factories and textile mills. Among them was a boy named Edgar Torres, whose journey would become one of hardship and survival. At just 10 years old, Edgar embarked on a treacherous solo journey from El Salvador to San Diego. The road was fraught with danger, testing his endurance and will to survive. After arriving in the U.S., Edgar was sent to live with relatives in Freeport, New York. But life there was far from stable. To survive, Edgar resorted to shoplifting clothes from local stores. However, by the time he was 12, he had grown weary of the constant struggle and decided to leave. He moved into a refugee housing complex for Salvadorans at 45th and Broadway in Queens, a bleak and notorious neighborhood avoided by most. Life in Queens offered little solace. For Edgar, the biggest threat came not from poverty, but from the Latin Kings. Each morning on his way to school, he and his friends endured relentless harassment and bullying by gang members. But Edgar, no longer willing to tolerate the abuse, decided to fight back. Determined to protect himself and his friends, Edgar rallied his peers and formed a gang of their own. They began meeting regularly outside a 7-Eleven on Broadway, and it wasn't long before their group earned the name Los 711s. What started as a small act of defiance soon became a turning point in New York's underground world. Los 711s was more than just a group of kids fighting back. It was the spark that ignited a new chapter in the city's ongoing battle for dominance among its shadowy forces. The name Los 711 sounded trivial, almost laughable. It was a name that invited mockery not only from outsiders but also from the formidable Latin Kings. To them, the notion of a gang named after a convenience store threatening their dominance was absurd. They dismissed Los 711s as insignificant, incapable of challenging their control over their territory. But reality is rarely so simple. As word of Los 711 spread, their existence began resonating within the Salvadoran community in New York and eventually reached Los Angeles. In California, MS-13 had already risen as a brutal and dominant force, a nightmare in the gang underworld. When news of this new gang in New York disrupting the status quo reached MS-13, they were enraged. They decided to take action not just for their own power, but also to defend their Salvadoran brethren. MS-13 wasted no time. Through familial networks, they pinpointed the building at 45th and Broadway, where Edgar Torres and other Salvadoran refugees lived. What began as a territorial scuffle soon evolved into something much darker. In July 1991, 6 MS-13 members flew from Los Angeles to New York. They gathered discreetly outside the building on 45th and Broadway, waiting to confront Edgar. When they found him, they wasted no time with pleasantries. They patted his shoulder, ordered him to summon his gang, and convened a meeting. That night, the MS 13 members laid out their vision. They spoke of the gang's power, its influence, and why Edgar and his Salvadoran crew needed to join them. They argued that the only way to resist the Latin King's dominance was through strength and unity under the banner of MS 13. Without hesitation, Edgar and the entirety of Los 711s pledged their allegiance to MS 13, marking the birth of the gang's first New York chapter. The 6 MS 13 envoys returned to Los Angeles, leaving Edgar in charge. From that moment, MS 13 began its aggressive expansion in New York, becoming a direct and dangerous rival to the Latin Kings. While MS 13 solidified its presence, the Latin Kings faced an internal power struggle. Luis Felipe, despite his absolute authority, grew increasingly paranoid and consumed by his thirst for control. He began to perceive a looming threat to his rule. Rafael Gonzalez, also known as King Mousy. King Mousy was no ordinary gang member. He was charismatic, respected, and immensely influential within the Latin Kings. His growing popularity cast a shadow over Luis's leadership, sparking fears that Mousy could challenge his throne. By May 1993, Luis decided to act. He ordered William Cartagena, known as King Lil Man, one of his most loyal followers, to eliminate King Mousy. But there was a problem. King Lil Man deeply respected King Mousy. In truth, most of the Latin kings in New York admired Mousy for his strength and leadership. Luis's order didn't just stir hesitation, it planted seeds of quiet rebellion. Months passed, and by October 1993, King Mousy remained untouched. The gang's unity began to fracture, with murmurs of dissent spreading among its ranks. Luis's once unquestionable authority now wavered. Luis was not a man of patience. He expected orders to be executed swiftly, often within a week. Yet out of respect for King Lil Man, he extended the deadline by several months. However, as October arrived and 5 months had passed without action, Luis's patience wore thin. Feeling increasingly defied, Luis reached his breaking point. King Lil Man's failure to carry out the hit was not just disobedience, it was a direct challenge to his rule. And Luis Felipe, a man who thrived on fear and power, could not tolerate defiance. It was time for him to take drastic measures. On October 30th, 1993, 3 members of the Latin Kings were ordered to break into King Mousy's apartment in Queens. What they didn't anticipate was encountering Victor Hirschman, Mousy's brother-in-law. Though they had no idea who he was, hesitation was not in their nature. A single gunshot shattered the silence, sending Victor fleeing through the apartment. As the intruders chased him to the back, they discovered that Mousy had already escaped through a window. But for Luis Felipe, catching Mousy wasn't the priority. What mattered was the principle. The mission was completed within a week, something King Lil Man had failed to achieve in 5 long months. By November 1993, Luis's discontent with King Lil Man became impossible to conceal. He accused him of embezzling gang funds. A baseless claim, but in Luis's eyes, even a minor excuse was enough to justify removing Lil Man from power. Luis ordered Jose Gabriel, known as King Teardrop, to eliminate Lil Man. At the same time, he instructed Ismael Rios, King Jr., and Ronnie Gonzalez to target Lil Man's wife, Queen Margie. By the end of November 1993, King Lil Man's body was discovered in a dark alley in Queens. King Teardrop had carried out the mission with precision. However, Ismael and Ronnie faltered when it came to Queen Margie. Their conscience and moral hesitation held them back, and they decided to spare her life. This decision drove Luis into a fury. To him, sparing Margie was an act of defiance, a direct challenge to his authority. Enraged, Luis swiftly ordered the elimination of Ismael and Ronnie. In January 1994, Ismael was found dead in his car, another victim of Luis's ruthless enforcement. Ronnie, though managing to escape death, couldn't evade punishment. By now, the Latin Kings were spiraling into chaos. The once tightly unified gang was fractured, its members consumed by fear and mistrust. The growing instability caught the attention of the NYPD and federal authorities. Since April 1993, federal agents have been monitoring Luis Felipe, intercepting and copying his letters while allowing them to reach their intended recipients. Each letter added to the growing pile of evidence against him, painting a damning picture of his orchestration of violence from behind bars. By 1995, the disarray within the Latin Kings could no longer be concealed. Federal prosecutors charged Luis with multiple crimes connected to the bloodshed he had orchestrated. In March 1995, Luis Felipe was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms along with permanent solitary confinement. He spent 23 hours a day locked in his cell, with a single hour of isolated exercise time, completely cut off from the world. The isolation marked the ultimate downfall of Luis Felipe. Stripped of his influence, his reign over the Latin kings came to an end, yet his absence left a power vacuum that heralded a dangerous new chapter for the gang. The mantle of leadership passed to Antonio Fernandez, better known as King Tone. Unlike his predecessor, Antonio had a radically different vision for the Latin kings. He sought to reform the gang, steering it away from its criminal reputation and transforming it into a more positive, community-oriented street organization. Under Antonio's leadership, the Latin kings experienced significant changes. His reforms aimed to shift the gang's focus toward activism and social programs, presenting a more constructive image. However, these changes were not destined to last. By the 2000s, a new threat loomed. MS-13, the rapidly expanding and notoriously violent gang, had solidified its presence in New York. The rivalry between the Latin Kings and MS-13 escalated quickly, pushing the former to the brink. The clash between these two titanic forces culminated in a bloody turf war. At the center of this conflict was a seemingly peaceful suburb, Brentwood, located just 40 minutes from New York City. Brentwood had once been a haven for police and firefighter families seeking refuge from the chaos of urban life. Now it stood at the heart of a brutal gang war that would shake the community to its core. As the 2000s approached, Brentwood, once a tranquil suburban area, found itself caught in the violent rivalry between the Latin Kings and MS-13. The battleground was everywhere, even in Brentwood High School, where clashes between the two gangs became an unsettling norm. In response to the growing tension, the MS-13 leadership decided to send a message. They chose a young recruit, Carlos Ortega, known as Silencio, to prove his worth. On February 17, 2010, Silencio meticulously planned to lure David Sandler, a member of the Latin Kings, into a deadly trap. Using Facebook, Silencio invited David to meet him at Tim Lane Drive at 5 p.m. David, unaware of what awaited him, agreed and arrived with 2 friends. Silencio, however, came alone. As David pulled up, Silencio approached the car window. Without hesitation, bang! A gunshot shattered the tense silence, leaving chaos and shock in its wake. The attack was a watershed moment, marking Brentwood's transformation from a peaceful suburb into a violent battleground. For MS-13, however, this was just the beginning. Just a week later, Silencio and his closest ally, Boxer, were dining at El Rancho Grill in Hampstead, New York. For reasons unknown, they decided to skip paying their bill and attempted to leave. But as they exited, a security guard intercepted them, demanding they settle the tab. Unaware he was confronting 2 dangerous MS-13 members, the guard escalated the situation, wrestling Boxer to the ground and restraining him until he agreed to pay. Though the confrontation ended without further violence, Boxer was seething. As he glared at the security guard, he left a chilling warning: "This isn't over." It wasn't an empty threat. On March 6, 2010, Boxer returned to El Rancho Grill, seeking the same security guard. Without a word, he approached, and bang! Another gunshot rang out, igniting a fresh wave of violence that further destabilized the community. A week later, Silencio and Boxer were assigned a new task by their MS-13 leaders: to eliminate Mario Quijada, a Latin Kings member deemed unworthy of continuing the fight. The gang believed Mario was failing to apply enough pressure on rival factions and had outlived his usefulness. On March 17, 2010, Silencio and Boxer called Mario, inviting him to hang out at Far Rockaway Beach. They picked him up from his home in Nassau and drove straight to the beach. Once there, they led Mario toward the water's edge, where death awaited him. This brutal act was just one in a series of violent events that plunged Brentwood into an era of bloodshed. The once peaceful suburb had become synonymous with heinous crimes and gang warfare. The relentless conflict between MS-13 and the Latin Kings entered a new phase, with the fighting spilling into Jamaica. Queens, once famous for its legendary rappers and vibrant artists the neighborhood had, by the 2000s, transformed into a hub of gang violence. At the forefront of the chaos were two deadly factions: MS-13's Centralis Locos Salvatrucas, CLS, and the Latin Kings, the Black Mob. The CLS branch of MS-13, one of the most dangerous criminal groups in New York, became even deadlier in 2012 under the leadership of Marcelo Esquivel, known as Profugo. Profugo harbored a deep hatred for the Latin Kings, particularly targeting one of their most prominent members, Daniel Licona Gonzalez. Under Profugo's command, the CLS solidified its reputation for brutality and precision. His disdain for the Latin Kings, especially Licona, drove him to escalate the conflict, leaving the streets of Jamaica, Queens, soaked in blood. This rivalry between two equally violent and strategic gangs marked one of the most volatile periods in New York's gang history. Neither side showed any intention of retreating, setting the stage for an even bloodier showdown. On July 2, 2012, Profugo, the ruthless leader of MS-13's CLS faction, issued a chilling order to two of his young recruits. Their mission: pedal to the intersection of 149th and Low Court, deep within Latin Kings territory in Jamaica, Queens, and carry out a violent attack. When they arrived, Daniel Gonzalez, an influential member of the Latin Kings, was standing unsuspectingly on the corner. The two MS-13 members approached on their bikes, shouting their gang's battle cry as they closed in. Without hesitation, they unleashed a brutal assault, igniting a fierce wave of vengeance and further escalating the bitter rivalry between the two factions. This act of violence set the tone for the deepening animosity between MS-13 and the Latin Kings, pushing the conflict to unprecedented levels of intensity. Yet, as with many such incidents, the strict code of silence observed by both gangs ensured the details remained buried in the shadows. Neither side spoke of the carnage, leaving only whispers of their actions behind. On May 18, 2017, the fragile tension between the two gangs exploded again. Jonathan Garcia, a Black Mob Latin Kings member known as Jo, set out on a mission of vengeance. His target, Daniel Flores alias Monster, a prominent MS-13 member. Jo rode his bike to 9428 88th Street, an address where Monster was known to frequent. Spotting his target standing at the doorway, Jo wasted no time. He approached quickly, raised his weapon, and bang! A single gunshot ended Monster's life instantly. What could have been dismissed as another gangland killing instead triggered a chain reaction. The murder led to intense scrutiny from law enforcement, resulting in 3 indictments and the arrests of everyone captured on video in connection with the crime. In New York, such crimes rarely escape the weight of severe sentencing, despite the growing pile of bodies and mounting investigations. The deeper motives and stories behind the feud remained an enigma. Both MS-13 and the Latin Kings adhered to an unwavering rule of silence, keeping the true scope of their war hidden from the world. To outsiders, they were like two shadowy forces, leaving a trail of bloody vendettas and shattered communities in their wake. The battle between MS-13 and the Latin Kings continued to loom over New York like a perpetual storm cloud. The incidents described above were but a glimpse into the unrelenting violence that defined their conflict. The enduring war between these two gangs serves as a haunting reminder of the cost of unchecked violence. Their struggle isn't just about power, it's rooted in a deeply flawed belief that brutality is the only way to command respect and maintain influence. In their relentless pursuit of dominance, they trample countless innocent lives, perpetuating a cycle of bloodshed that seems to have no end. One can't help but wonder, will they ever realize that each attack, each death, only deepens the hatred and leaves more destruction in its wake? If you've ever ventured into the wild, rugged countryside of California or Nevada, you'll notice immediately how these areas carry an entirely different vibe compared to the bustling urban zones of the state. This isn't the land of trendy lattes or avocado toast. It's a harsh, almost untamed world where everything exudes a raw, unfiltered energy. Picture this: you're driving from the Bay Area to Lake Tahoe. After passing through Sacramento, you're just about an hour away from your destination. Suddenly hunger strikes, and you decide to pull over at a small diner in a quiet town called Placerville, California. As you step inside, a cheerful waitress greets you with a warm smile that almost makes you forget the world outside. There's something oddly comforting about the place. But as you prepare to leave, your eyes catch a group of burly men outside. They're heavily tattooed, sporting scruffy beards, and perched on massive motorcycles. The air around them reeks of sweat and booze, drifting with the breeze and making it impossible to ignore their presence. At first glance, you might think they're just middle-aged men enjoying a casual gathering. But no, these are seasoned bikers, and you've just stepped into a shadowy world where chaos and violence simmer beneath the surface. Placerville is far from the only place where such a world exists. In fact, these motorcycle clubs span from Laughlin, Nevada, to Victorville, California, weaving a dangerous network across the western U.S. To understand this phenomenon, we need to go back to 1945, right after World War II. Many soldiers returned from the battlefield in devastating conditions, carrying scars that went far deeper than their skin. They had witnessed unimaginable horrors, and upon their return, many had no families, no friends, and no way to escape the haunting memories of war. To cope with their isolation and pain, some of these veterans found solace in forming motorcycle clubs. While there's no concrete evidence to confirm this, it's widely believed that one of the first clubs was POBOB, short for Pissed Off Bastards of Bloomington. This club was established in Bloomington, California, a desolate town with little more than dirt roads and dilapidated houses. The founders of POBOB weren't looking for trouble, they simply wanted to rebel, to break free from society's constraints and to reclaim a sense of freedom. Soon, other motorcycle clubs emerged. At the time, these bikers were rowdy but relatively harmless. Just men who loved riding motorcycles and chasing a taste of freedom. But everything changed on July 3rd, 1947, during the annual motorcycle rally in Hollister, Northern California. Since the 1930s, Hollister had hosted this event on July 3rd and 4th, drawing thousands of riders eager to showcase their bikes and test their mettle. Yet 1947 was different. Every Independence Day, thousands of bikers from across the western states would descend on the small town of Hollister, California, for this renowned rally. With only 4,500 residents and a mere 7 police officers patrolling the area, the town was accustomed to peace and stability. But in 1947, something extraordinary happened that forever altered the landscape of motorcycle culture in America. However, 1947 marked a turning point for Hollister, one that would forever alter the perception of motorcycle clubs. After the event officially ended, riders from various clubs flooded local bars and diners. That's when things started to spiral out of control. Participants, fiery riders from different places, began clashing with each other. Accounts suggest that the Market Street Commandos from San Francisco locked horns with POBOB, igniting a fierce North versus South California showdown. What followed was a night of unrestrained chaos. The tensions escalated into an outright violent frenzy that didn't subside until the early hours of July 5th. During those 2 wild days, Hollister's meager force of 7 police officers was completely overwhelmed, powerless against the ferocity of the crowd. The town was left in shambles, and the story of the conflict quickly dominated headlines nationwide. Though the situation was alarming, it was the media's exaggerated reports that truly sent shockwaves across the country. For the first time, the term motorcycle club became synonymous with images of violence and anarchy, painting a menacing picture in the public eye. Barely 2 months later, on Labor Day, a similar incident unfolded in Riverside, this time between POBOB and a rival local gang known as the Outlaws. This confrontation further fueled animosity towards motorcycle clubs, prompting the Riverside sheriff to label them as rebels. In response to mounting criticism, the American Motorcyclist Association, AMA, attempted damage control, claiming that 99% of its members were law-abiding citizens. However, the statement was widely mocked, even among bikers themselves. It was in this tense atmosphere that a new term emerged: one percenters referring to those who rejected societal norms. The phrase symbolized a deep and irreparable divide within the motorcycle community, ushering in an era of unprecedented turmoil. As the chaos grew, some members began to feel disillusioned with the direction things were headed. Even Otto Friedli, the leader of POBOB, became dissatisfied with his club's trajectory, deciding he'd had enough. Friedli left POBOB to create a new group. On March 7th, 1948, Otto gathered a few friends to brainstorm a name for his new club. A man named Arvid Olsen suggested Hells Angels. Initially met with skepticism, Arvid explained the name's origin. Inspired by his service in China, and the group quickly embraced it. With the name Hells Angels, the gang began recruiting members and establishing its reputation. They chose Fontana in western San Bernardino as their base of operations. Thus, Hells Angels was born, a legendary motorcycle gang that would grow relentlessly across California over the next decade, spiraling into an unstoppable force. But this was only the beginning. What happened in 1953 would catapult Hells Angels into becoming one of the most notorious names in history. In 1953, a seismic shift occurred as Hells Angels expanded its influence northward. It all started with a member from San Bernardino, a man named Rocky Graves. Early that year, Rocky left his hometown and moved to San Francisco, where he immediately set to work establishing a new Hells Angels chapter. Rocky roamed tirelessly through the city's working-class neighborhoods from Crocker, Amazon to Excelsior, recruiting bikers with promises of freedom and lawlessness. In no time, he successfully assembled a group of 13 full-fledged members. Yet the story of Hells Angels didn't end there. Just a few years later, a new name would rise to prominence, one that would thrust the club into a dramatic and tumultuous chapter in its history. The man's name was Sonny Barger, a figure marked by both tragedy and resilience. Born in Modesto, Sonny's life was shattered early on when his mother abandoned him at the tender age of 4. His father struggling to make ends meet sent Sonny to live with his grandmother in Oakland. His childhood was defined by chaos and loss. At just 15 years old, Sonny dropped out of school. His teenage years became a whirlwind of rebellion, secretive escapades, and irreversible mistakes. Yet amid the turmoil, Sonny realized he needed something to bring order to his chaotic life. This realization led him to establish the Oakland chapter of the Hells Angels in 1957. Sonny Barger was not the kind of person who easily won people over. He was known for his toughness, bluntness, and knack for stirring up trouble. Unsurprisingly, the Southern California chapters of the Hells Angels initially disliked him. Rumors swirled that during the club's early meetings, Sonny frequently clashed with members from the South. But Sonny's strength and straightforward nature caught the attention of Otto Friedli, the founder of the Hells Angels. Otto saw in Sonny a natural-born leader, someone capable of steering the club forward. Despite significant opposition from other members, Otto handed over the reins of the entire organization to Sonny when legal troubles forced him to step down. This decision, though seemingly practical at the time, marked the beginning of a dark era for the Hells Angels. The gang evolved from a group of unruly motorcycle enthusiasts into a deeper underworld entity. Engaging in activities, Sonny began exploring for profit. Under his leadership, the Hells Angels transformed into a covert empire that served Sonny's ambitions. What stood out about Sonny was his unapologetic boldness. He made no effort to hide the gang's operations. Instead, he wore them as a badge of honor. Every Hells Angels member proudly donned a leather vest bearing the club's emblem, a daring symbol of defiance against society and the law. On the back of these vests, the name of the gang was emblazoned prominently across the center. These details weren't mere embellishments, they were declarations of identity. The Hells Angels were the only gang to claim California on their vests, fiercely protecting it as an exclusive symbol. Nobody dared to challenge this claim. Those who did would pay a steep price. Yet some were bold enough to defy them. This takes us to Southern California, where the Hells Angels' underground battles escalated into a high-stakes war. In 1969, in the small city of Montebello, a new motorcycle gang emerged, the Mongols Motorcycle Club. Inspired by the might of Genghis Khan's Mongol Empire, the Mongols declared their mission from the outset to take over California. Their vests bore only their logo and the word Mongols displayed boldly across the top, a simple design that carried a powerful, defiant message. But their mission wasn't just about riding motorcycles. The Mongols quickly delved into the criminal underworld, trafficking goods with a level of danger akin to the exploits of a Jesse Pinkman. From the start, they were a force no one dared to provoke. Initially, relations between the Mongols and Hell's Angels were surprisingly peaceful. Both gangs operated under an unspoken rule: we go our way, you go yours. Everything changed in 1977 when a tense event ignited from seemingly minor past conflicts. To understand it, we need to go back to 1976. Chester Green, a member of the Hells Angels San Francisco chapter, grew frustrated with internal disputes within the gang and decided to leave. He moved to Los Angeles, where he joined the Mongols. Chester wasted no time ridiculing the Hells Angels, calling them weak and undeserving of their fearsome reputation. His taunts lit a fire of defiance within the Mongols that no one could extinguish. In April 1977 in Anaheim, California, the Mongols and Hells Angels faced off for the first time during a trade gathering. The atmosphere grew tense as if a storm were about to erupt. The Mongols surrounded the Hells Angels, who quickly realized they were outnumbered by at least 30 men. In such a dire situation, running might have seemed the logical choice, but for the Hells Angels, bound by their principles and pride, retreat was not an option. The inevitable clash began. A Hells Angels member boldly stepped forward to confront the Mongols' leader directly. Chaos erupted like an unstoppable storm. The Mongols emerged victorious with an overwhelming win, but the Hells Angels gained respect for their defiance in the face of superior numbers. However, since the Hells Angels had initiated the altercation, the Mongols decided it was time to send a strong message. That message was unmistakable. The Mongols added the word California to the bottom rocker of their vests, a detail that Hells Angels had long claimed as their exclusive symbol of pride and dominance. For the Hells Angels, California was more than a word, it was an integral part of their identity. The Mongols' act of adopting it was an undeniable challenge. On Labor Day in 1977 at 7:05 p.m., a group of Mongols roared down Interstate 5 on their motorcycles, proudly wearing their newly modified vests with California emblazoned across the bottom rocker. They were headed to a major motorcycle event where various gangs would gather intent on showcasing their victory and flaunting their new emblem. What they didn't realize was that two Hells Angels members were quietly following them from behind, and another confrontation was only a matter of time. This was no longer just a battle for pride, but a fight to assert dominance. A war neither side could back down from. The Mongols were caught off guard when the Hells Angels escalated the rivalry to unforeseen levels, all over a stitched word on a vest. 3 days later, the Mongols convened at a cemetery to mourn two of their members, Redbeard and Jingles. During the service, a Hells Angels member from San Diego unexpectedly appeared. Without saying a word, he placed a large bouquet of flowers on the grave and quietly left. The Mongols, bewildered, interpreted this as a sign of respect and an apology from the Hells Angels, opting not to retaliate. But their shock turned to fury when they realized the gesture was a mockery. The Hells Angels had openly ridiculed the Mongols for their perceived inaction. From that moment on, the feud between the two motorcycle gangs spiraled out of control, despite neither gang having a fixed headquarters and constantly being on the move. Clashes erupted everywhere, from clubhouses and highways to restaurants and casinos. Violence and conflict spread into every corner of their rivalry. By 2002, the war between the Mongols and Hells Angels had reached its peak. Confrontations could break out anywhere, at any time. On April 27, 2002, in the small town of Laughlin, Nevada, thousands of bikers gathered for the annual Laughlin River Run, an event that attracted up to 50,000 people every year. This was where all the bikers gathered, from the Mongols to the Hells Angels, in an atmosphere thick with tension. After the event ended, Christian Tate, a Hells Angels member from San Diego, decided not to stay the night. Alone, he began his journey back to San Diego via Interstate 40, a desolate highway flanked by arid desert landscapes. Along the way, he stopped in Ludlow, California, to refuel, unaware that someone was quietly following him. As Christian arrived at the gas station, the mysterious figure pulled in as well. What happened next stunned anyone who happened to witness it. A sudden, Brutal attack in a remote location where help might not arrive anytime soon. Christian was alone. No one knows for certain what transpired in the dark that night. Did he manage to call for help? What really happened during those chaotic moments? At 2 a.m., a local police officer received a report of a group of Mongols surrounding some Hells Angels members at Harrah's Hotel. Hells Angels quickly rallied to rescue their comrades, igniting a violent confrontation right inside the hotel. In mere moments, an all-out brawl erupted. For Laughlin police accustomed to the quiet life of a small town, the aftermath was weeks of investigation. Yet they couldn't conclusively determine if Christian Tate's incident was connected to the 2 a.m. brawl. The fallout from the hotel clash was devastating. 7 Hells Angels members and 6 Mongols lost their lives. Among them, Hells Angels member Frederick Donahue managed to escape. However, 6 years later, he was apprehended while driving through a small town and sentenced to life in prison. This was a war without mercy, leaving no room for negotiation, only survival. The incident sent shockwaves across the nation, exposing the deadly dangers lurking in the world of motorcycle gangs. Just when it seemed the story couldn't become more intense, a shocking event 5 years later escalated everything to an even more terrifying level. On September 2nd, 2008 in San Francisco, the Hells Angels chapter led by Mark Papa Frisco Guardado found itself at the center of another storm. That evening, Papa Frisco was enjoying drinks and friendly conversation with friends in the Mission District at the corner of 24th and Treat Streets. The atmosphere was relaxed and lively until it wasn't. The tension skyrocketed when Christopher Ablett, a Mongols member, walked into the bar. This fateful encounter not only shattered the evening's jovial mood, but also set off a seismic ripple that reached far beyond the biker gangs. Within hours, Operation Black Rain was launched, a massive operation of unprecedented scale. It involved 160 search warrants, 110 arrests stretching from California to Oregon, and even as far as Ohio. The primary goal? To dismantle the Mongols. Though the Mongols survived the onslaught, the blow dealt to their power left the gang reeling, adding to their woes. They found themselves locked in an age-old feud with the Southsiders, a story riddled with tragedy and one that deserves its own telling. Meanwhile, the Hells Angels continued their rapid expansion, extending their influence at an astonishing pace. The gang now boasted 467 chapters across 59 countries, yet their membership numbers remained surprisingly small, between 300 and 500 individuals. Have you ever wondered why a gang as powerful as Hells Angels has so few members? The reason is simple. Joining Hells Angels is like getting into Harvard of the underground world. A brutally tough challenge. To become a member, you must be a close friend of an existing member for at least 5 years before you can even submit an application. After that, you'll need to pass a tough vote from all the leaders to prove that you're worthy. They seek absolute loyalty and a deep understanding of the sacrifices that come with being an official member. Once you're in, you must always be ready to stand up and protect your brothers no matter the situation. Recently, the legendary former leader of Hells Angels, Sonny Barger, passed away after a long battle with old age. His funeral was held in Stockton just 10 days ago, and the event was so significant that the San Joaquin sheriff had to issue a warning about potential risks. Thankfully, everything went smoothly. Thousands of bikers from all over descended upon Stockton, their engines roaring as they flooded the streets to pay their respects to the founder of Hells Angels. One attendee shared, "He was an incredible man. At first I was a bit nervous about being here, but honestly everything went smoothly. I came with an open heart, just wanting to show my respect." The funeral wasn't just a time to remember a legend, it was also a day for all Hells Angels to reflect on the past, reminisce about the memories, and focus on what matters most, showing unity. It seems Hells Angels is gradually changing its image. Brotherhood and a love for motorcycles are now the central focus, rising above the violence and bloodshed that once defined their name. The story of Hells Angels and the Mongols is more than just a rivalry between two motorcycle gangs. It's a life and death struggle centered around loyalty, power, and survival in a dangerous underground world. What makes this story so compelling is not just the gang conflicts, but how they mirror a society full of contradictions, where loyalty and defiance can lead to devastating consequences. 40,000. That's the number of inmates the massive prison in El Salvador can hold. As a maximum security facility, one would expect the government to at least ensure basic living conditions for its prisoners, wouldn't they? But no. Life inside this colossal prison is anything but bearable. Behind its unyielding concrete walls, where sunlight barely seeps through and the air is perpetually thick with the stench of sweat and despair. Each cell contains just 80 iron beds for 100 inmates. This means 20 individuals must fight over space to sleep, forced to endure cold metal bunks without mattresses, pillows, or blankets. Why does this mega prison with all its grandeur provide so few beds? The answer lies in a grim narrative not just of incarceration, but of a ruthless struggle against corruption, violence, and the relentless effort to contain a problem that has haunted this Central American nation for decades. This prison, chillingly named the Terrorism Confinement Center, evokes dread just by its name, doesn't it? Covering a vast 166 hectares. It is surrounded by electric fences and an 11-meter-high concrete wall fortified with 7 watchtowers. Constructing it required 3,000 workers laboring tirelessly for 7 months straight. Upon entering, the gates slam shut with a finality that resonates through the air. Inmates are immediately subjected to thorough searches, both manually and electronically, to detect any concealed weapons or contraband. Once past these walls, all connection to the outside world is severed thanks to a comprehensive network of electronic jamming systems installed throughout the facility. A force of 600 soldiers and 250 police officers maintains constant vigilance, while dozens of cameras monitor every move inmates make, ensuring there is no respite from surveillance. Once inside, prisoners have only one goal: survival. Inmates are assigned to cells. As mentioned earlier, 80 beds must accommodate 100 people. According to prison officials, prisoners are strictly denied access to mattresses, cushions, or warm blankets. The government makes no attempt to hide the prison's purpose: punishment over rehabilitation. The Deputy Minister of Justice bluntly stated that this maximum security prison was designed to turn the lives of those who harm the people of El Salvador into a living nightmare, and they've undoubtedly succeeded. The prison boasts dining halls, gyms, and ping-pong tables, but inmates shouldn't dream of ever using them. These amenities are exclusively reserved for guards and prison staff. Inmates are only allowed to leave their cells to attend court hearings or to endure punishment in pitch dark, windowless isolation rooms. Guards patrolling the cells carry handguns and rifles, prepared to defend themselves against potential attacks. Moreover, they are authorized to use lethal force if necessary and will not hesitate to pull the trigger. Could it possibly get any worse? Unfortunately, this is merely the surface of the brutality that defines the lives of those imprisoned in El Salvador, where each day is a battle for survival, and the line between life and death is as fragile as a spider's thread. President Bukele proudly declared this mega prison to be the largest in the Americas, claiming it would be the key to victory in the fight against criminal gangs that have plagued this Central American nation for years. However, the story of this prison is not just one of incarceration, it's a harrowing tale of inhumane conditions, unchecked violence, and extreme overcrowding that have long cast a dark shadow over El Salvador's prison system. In reality, El Salvador holds the grim distinction of having the highest incarceration rate in the world, with nearly 2% of its adult population behind bars. By 2021, the nation's prisons were operating at twice their capacity. Take La Esperanza, the largest prison in El Salvador at the time, designed for just over 10,000 inmates. It was crammed with more than 30,000, turning daily life inside into a brutal fight for survival. But things took an even darker turn in March 2022 when El Salvador witnessed one of its deadliest waves of violence since the end of the Civil War in 1992. In just 24 hours, 62 people were ruthlessly murdered across the country. By the end of that weekend, the death toll had surged to 87, leaving the nation reeling in the wake of a storm of bloodshed. The government pointed fingers at MS-13 and Barrio 18, El Salvador's most notorious and dangerous gangs, holding them responsible for these heinous killings. In response, the government declared a nationwide state of emergency, a situation that remains ongoing. This emergency law granted authorities sweeping powers to arrest anyone without a warrant and suspended the right to legal counsel. The crackdown on gang violence led to the arrest of over 63,000 suspects, pushing an already overburdened judicial system to the brink of collapse. Police and military forces set up checkpoints, encircled towns and neighborhoods, and conducted house-to-house searches. Overhead drones hovered like predatory eagles, ready to pounce on their targets. People were arrested in the streets, on their way to work, or even in their own homes. Sometimes a small tattoo was enough to condemn them, a mark of gang affiliation in the eyes of the authorities. Now imagine being an innocent tourist in El Salvador at that time, suddenly arrested and facing imprisonment simply because of a tattoo on your body. How would you survive such a nightmare? Those detained on vague suspicions were denied any alternative measures to pretrial detention, such as bail or house arrest. They were immediately thrown into overcrowded prisons while prosecutors scrambled to build cases against them. But the biggest question remains: where will these prisoners be held? With over 63,000 arrests, it's no surprise that a massive prison was built in record time. One might think things couldn't possibly get worse, but the reality is far more complex and terrifying. Even though the new mega prison in El Salvador has the capacity for 40,000 inmates, overcrowding is inevitable. Gang members are bound to fight for dominance, turning the facility into a breeding ground for violence. Every moment becomes a life-or-death struggle. It's hard to tell whether this is a detention center or a barbaric execution machine. Miguel Montenegro, director of El Salvador's Human Rights Commission, warned that this prison would become as nightmarish as the country's other notoriously harsh facilities, where the very notion of human rights is discarded and replaced by savage battles for survival. While the Salvadoran government has taken drastic measures to combat gang violence, one has to ask, do these detention methods genuinely uphold human rights, or are they merely a thinly veiled excuse for systemic cruelty? Human rights organizations such as Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International have raised alarms over the lack of basic rights for prisoners in El Salvador's jails, ranging from the absence of medical care to inadequate hygiene facilities. Allegations of torture and abuse remain unresolved issues, though they are far from new in El Salvador. The country's prison system has been steeped in a human rights crisis for years. The fact that inmates are forced to eat with their bare hands exemplifies a level of cruelty that cannot be ignored. Overcrowding and cramped cells, where inmates are confined 24 hours a day, have turned these facilities into modern-day torture chambers. One might think such horrors are relics of the past, but the grim realities behind the walls of El Salvador's mega prison paint a far bleaker picture. Raquel Caballero from El Salvador's Office of the Attorney General for Human Rights struggled to find words to describe what she witnessed in the country's prisons. The government's extreme measures have transformed these facilities into veritable hellscapes, where the line between punishment and torture has all but vanished. For those detained there, every last shred of dignity and basic human rights is systematically stripped away. She recounted the case of a prisoner with a bullet lodged in his hip who was denied medical attention, and others suffering from severe chronic illnesses left untreated, abandoned by authorities. Reports describe abysmal conditions with dozens of inmates crammed into small, unsanitary cells, forced to endure a life devoid of clean water and basic hygiene. One recently released former inmate shared harrowing details of his imprisonment. In one holding area, 350 prisoners were packed together, all relying on a single clogged toilet. Without utensils, they ate with their bare hands, food often spilling from cut-up plastic bottles or scraps of plastic bags. And yet this was not the worst of it. Conditions deteriorated further after the government declared a national state of emergency. Human rights organizations have documented widespread abuses, with over 80 detainees dying in custody during the crackdown. These victims spanned all ages and genders. A government insider revealed that deaths occurred daily, invariably attributed to natural causes. Yet when families came to claim their loved ones' bodies, they were met with corpses bearing bruises and signs of severe beatings. What natural cause could explain such injuries? Despite the brutality of President Bukele's extreme measures, the people of El Salvador have steadfastly supported him in his war against gang violence. They believe his iron-fisted policies are yielding results evidenced by a sharp decline in homicide rates. But is the price of this fragile stability truly worth it? For decades, the people of El Salvador have endured relentless cycles of violence and trauma. The scars from nearly 3 decades of bloodshed and a devastating civil war from 1980 to 1992 remain unhealed, leaving the nation shattered and bereft. When deportees returned from the U.S., they were unable to reintegrate into peaceful lives. Instead, they fell back into crime, drawing new generations into the unending vortex of violence. A generation of war orphans and disabled veterans has become the ideal recruitment pool for gangs in El Salvador. Children without families and soldiers who have lost everything now serve as tools in the hands of merciless criminals. But that's not all. The people of El Salvador have been worn down by the constant dread of extortion, a fear that pervades every aspect of daily life. Unlike the cartels in Mexico or Colombia, the gangs in El Salvador don't limit themselves to drug trafficking. They infiltrate every corner of society, preying on everyone from impoverished families to pregnant women, from children to the elderly. No one escapes their oppression. No one is spared their cruelty. Now, with the government's crackdown on gangs and the operation of the mega prison, a new chapter in the bloody history of this nation is unfolding. But is this truly the final solution, or merely a ticking time bomb waiting to explode? While the government and its supporters praise President Bukele's efforts, many others voice concerns about the negative consequences of mass incarceration and the inhumane conditions within these prisons. Human rights violations have escalated, and those detained have become mere pawns in a power game spinning out of control, with countless gang members confined under the harshest conditions imaginable. One must ask, does this policy genuinely address the issue of gang violence, or does it only complicate matters further, creating an endless cycle of brutality? Behind the prison walls, justice remains a distant dream. Pain and cruelty persist, endlessly repeated without resolution. The story of El Salvador's war on gangs forces us to reflect on the true cost of security and order. While President Bukele's aggressive measures have yielded some immediate results, the long-term consequences, such as human rights abuses and abysmal living conditions in prisons, cannot be ignored. Mass incarceration may offer a temporary sense of safety, but it also risks breeding a new generation filled with anger and driven by violence. I don't deny that this country desperately needs a solution, but is this approach truly tackling the root of the problem, or is it making everything worse? What we need is a fairer and more humane approach to building a genuinely sustainable society. Seattle, Washington isn't typically associated with crime stories. Instead, it often conjures images of rainy days, sports enthusiasts, adventurous hikers, and warm Starbucks coffee. But don't let that idyllic image fool you. Seattle harbors hidden corners few outsiders ever hear about. While it's true that Seattle boasts one of the nation's lowest murder rates at just 3 incidents per 100,000 residents, far below Oakland's rate, 10 times higher, or St. Louis, 20 times higher, but statistics don't tell the whole story. Crime here is concentrated in a handful of neighborhoods, and those places can rival the most dangerous pockets of any major U.S. city. Despite its seemingly safe reputation, certain streets in Seattle tell a much darker tale, and South Seattle is one area you simply cannot underestimate. Let's start with Holly Park, also known as 3900. Once a sprawling public housing project lining Martin Luther King Jr. Way, Holly Park was a desolate cluster of dilapidated government-managed single-story buildings, devoid of private homes. Everything changed in the 1980s when blue-wearing gangs from Los Angeles migrated to Seattle, staking their claim on the area. By 1985, Holly Park had transformed into a criminal hotspot infamous for its lawlessness and notoriety. The city of Seattle eventually took action, demolishing the entire neighborhood in an attempt to restore order. By 2000, Holly Park was erased and rebuilt. Stylish townhouses rose in its place, presenting a polished facade. However, appearances were deceiving. These new homes were reserved for low-income residents, cramming 1.400 housing units into a compact space. This attracted a large Somali and Ethiopian population, who quickly settled into the rebuilt Holly Park. But it didn't take long for them to confront a harsh reality. Simply living in Holly Park could come with a heavy price. Reputation alone made Holly Park residents unwelcome outside their neighborhood. It might sound hard to believe, but for those who call Holly Park home, This stigma is an unavoidable daily burden. Holly Park isn't just a famous name in South Seattle, it's also a battleground for relentless rivalries. One of its fiercest adversaries lies in Tukwila, home to ever-watchful foes ready to strike. Enter Samuel Rezine, an unforgettable figure when it comes to Holly Park's history. Before becoming a legend in Seattle's criminal underworld, Samuel lived a turbulent life filled with complex relationships and countless enemies. Samuel resided in New Holly, a place where news traveled at lightning speed, and even the smallest incident could be blown out of proportion. One of the most shocking tales to emerge was the accusation that two men in their 20s coerced a young woman into an encounter with five strangers. The scandal rocked the community for weeks. Eventually, Jonathan Ogube and Samuel Rezine stood trial for the alleged crime, both pleading not guilty. But Samuel's life wasn't defined solely by such controversies. He had no shortage of enemies, and chief among them was the notorious Tucktown Kings gang. Tucktown is the nickname for a small area in South Seattle, specifically in Tukwila, where a group of individuals who call themselves the Kings claim 144th Street as their territory. In 2011, Samuel was preparing to engage in a major deal with the Tucktown Kings involving thousands of dollars. However, the story has two completely different sides. According to the Tucktown Kings, Samuel never intended to complete the deal, but was merely trying to take the goods without paying. On the other hand, Samuel claimed that the Kings had set him up, forcing him to flee for his life. Regardless of the truth, the end result was clear. The Kings felt humiliated while Samuel boldly declared, "If you want it, come and take it." This defiant attitude was something the Kings could not overlook. They vowed not to stop until they reclaimed their honor. On February 2nd, 2012, violence erupted when Samuel, driving his mother's Escalade with his girlfriend Nakiba McDonald, entered Tucktown territory. Samuel assumed he could pass unnoticed, but he was gravely mistaken. A car sped up alongside them, and then suddenly, boom. Nakiba, a young woman with dreams of becoming an actress, became an unfortunate victim of this ongoing feud. While Samuel's actions may have cost her life had she fully understood the world Samuel was living in, but she might have realized that in this life, anything was possible. When questioned by police about the incident, Samuel remained tight-lipped, refusing to reveal any information about the attackers. Later, he made a chilling statement, "I'll handle this myself." It was a bold and reckless declaration, one that immediately put Samuel under constant police surveillance. Yet he disappeared for months, only to resurface with a dangerous plan for revenge. On September 17th, 2013, Samuel was driving his mother's Escalade back home after a long day. As his car turned onto an empty street, he felt something wasn't right. A tense sensation crept over him. He knew he was being watched. And then the silence shattered. Boom. The sharp crack of gunfire pierced the air. Acting on instinct, Samuel ducked and dashed into his house for cover. This time, he narrowly escaped with his life, but the sense of dread lingered. Just 2 days later, on September 19th, 2013, as Samuel stepped outside his house, another gunshot rang out from behind him. Boom! The sound tore through the air. Samuel barely managed to dive back inside, ducking to avoid the bullets. When he looked up, the assailant's car had sped away, failing once again to eliminate him. By now, Samuel understood that his luck wouldn't last forever. No matter how cautious he couldn't rely on fate to shield him indefinitely. Determined to change tactics, Samuel ditched the Escalade and purchased a new car to avoid drawing attention from his relentless enemies. But it wasn't long before his adversaries discovered his new ride. In 2014, after leaving his car in a parking lot, Samuel returned to find it engulfed in flames. His enemies weren't about to give up easily. Once again, Samuel was forced to buy another vehicle. This time, he chose a sleek black BMW 7 Series with tinted windows, glossy black rims, and an intense sound system. A bold choice for someone living on the edge. On May 15th, 2014, as Samuel drove his BMW down a deserted road in Renton, a suburb of Seattle, disaster struck again. One of his tires suddenly went flat. Samuel pulled over at a gas station, asking his girlfriend to go inside and exchange some money for change to pump air. He stayed in the car, distracted and waiting, unaware that another vehicle was rapidly approaching from the side. Boom! A bullet shattered through the window. striking him directly. Samuel was rushed to the hospital, his injuries severe enough to require 3 weeks of recovery. The numerous assassination attempts that failed to take him down earned him a notorious nickname, Mr. Untouchable. Despite being injured, Samuel refused to cooperate with the police. When questioned about the attack, he met them with silence. Instead of giving in, he decided to face his enemies head-on with bold actions. On October 2nd, 2014, Samuel drove into an area known to be controlled by his rivals. Without hesitation, he fired nearly 50 rounds into the air, throwing the entire neighborhood into chaos. Fortunately, no one was hit by the stray bullets. Within minutes, police arrived at the scene, but Samuel had already disappeared like a ghost. However, it wasn't long before the police caught him, and he was handed a severe sentence. But with his capture came an offer. The police demanded information about his enemies in exchange for leniency. Would Samuel cooperate? The answer was yes, and what he revealed shocked everyone. Samuel didn't just provide names. He laid bare every secret. He exposed the long-standing rivalry between Holly Park, his home turf, and Tucktown, the domain of his adversaries in Tukwila. When asked to name his rivals, Samuel unhesitatingly listed prominent figures in the criminal underworld: Reuben Donaldson, Randy Donaldson, and others, including names he even struggled to pronounce. Samuel Rezine, once a mysterious and tight-lipped figure in South Seattle's crime world, decided to break his silence. But he didn't stop at naming names. He handed over an explosive piece of evidence, a video created by the Tucktown Kings titled, "They Don't Want to Ride. They Don't Want to Rise." Samuel explained that the lyrics in the video served as a direct accusation against the gang, pointing to them as the ones responsible for the death of his girlfriend, Nakiba McDonald. But Samuel went further, describing in detail the vehicles the Tucktown Kings frequently used in their attacks on him. He recounted each model, year, color, every detail meticulously remembered from his encounters. These descriptions gave police a clear picture of the vehicles used by the gang. Despite providing valuable information, Samuel Rezine couldn't escape the hand of the law. Ultimately, he was sentenced to 8 years in prison. The story didn't end there. Since the fall of Holly Park, South Seattle has faced new enemies, ones closer than ever. Just minutes away lies Rainier Avenue and Cloverdale Street, in the South End neighborhood, home to a new and emerging gang called GGG, short for Grimy Gangsta Guerrillas. Despite being located in the heart of Seattle, the area presents an unexpectedly serene image. 2-story houses, well-kept gardens, and clean streets paint a surprisingly picturesque scene. Who would imagine that such a neighborhood could be the breeding ground for violent conflicts? Yet that's the reality. Leading the GGG is a young rapper making waves in Seattle's music scene, Tana Money. He built his reputation with a string of hit songs, including a video shot in Holly Park itself. With a single video shoot, Tana Money had unknowingly turned himself into the biggest enemy of the region. One misstep could lead to devastating consequences. On December 29th, 2019, Tana Money drove his gray Dodge Challenger out, heading to a nightclub. He had no idea that 3 Holly Park members, Pepe, Ali Sharif, and Aiden Muhammad, were trailing him, silently waiting for their chance. After Tana left the club, he remained blissfully unaware of the danger looming over him. As he sped on a Highway 509, everything changed in an instant. Boom! The world lost a bright young man with a radiant smile. Someone who had captured the hearts of countless hip-hop fans. His music had touched lives far and wide. Even people in states where his name wasn't known would listen to his songs and say, "I don't know who you are, but your music is incredible." His artistry transcended boundaries and resonated with listeners who had never even met him. But as powerful as his music was, it couldn't save him from a tragic end. Tana Money's death wasn't just a devastating loss for his family, it marked a turning point in the violent power struggles between criminal factions in the city. His story, once a mystery, has now become a haunting legacy that lingers in the shadows of Seattle streets. His death also set off a blood-soaked chain of events and ruthless battles for dominance. Sharif and Aiden Muhammad, 2 members of Holly Park, would eventually be arrested in connection to the attack. This event elevated Holly Park and the GGG gang to a new level of notoriety. They were no longer just minor players challenging each other in the shadows. They had become names that inspired fear in every corner of the city. After Tana Money's death, Revenge and relentless gang warfare became an unavoidable part of life for Seattle's residents. Loss after loss followed, with innocent lives being taken in the crossfire. No one could predict what would happen next. What do you think of Seattle now? Can you seriously look at these streets and not feel the weight of their dangers? Or is living in a city that once seemed safe now an impossible dream? Is it the environment that creates such individuals, or are they shaping their own environment? It's a question that has no easy answer, but it serves as a sobering reminder of the choices and consequences life on the streets brings. In 2003, the U.S. military faced one of its greatest challenges in the Middle East, capturing Saddam Hussein, the former president of Iraq. After losing power, he disappeared mysteriously, leaving behind no trace. Meanwhile, Iraq was plunged into brutal warfare, with many citizens still loyal to his regime. The mission to capture Saddam Hussein and bring him to justice was far more difficult than anyone had anticipated. Saddam was not only a dangerous adversary, but also incredibly cunning. He had vast wealth, extensive connections, loyal supporters, and dozens of safe houses. Somehow, Saddam always managed to stay one step ahead of the U.S. military, keeping them at a disadvantage. Over time, he was dubbed the Ghost, and the hunt for him became an almost impossible mission, like searching for a needle in a haystack. The story of Saddam Hussein's downfall became a dramatic chapter in the history of the 21st century. After the Gulf War, when the international coalition faced off against Iraq, all attention shifted to this notorious dictator. The U.S. government under President George W. Bush accused Iraq of possessing weapons of mass destruction. Additionally, the global war on terrorism and allegations of Saddam's brutal dictatorship spurred a large-scale military campaign to overthrow him. On March 20th, 2003, the U.S.-led coalition launched the invasion of Iraq, quickly toppling the Ba'ath regime and occupying the capital, Baghdad. Although the city was bombed heavily in early April 2003, there was no sign that Saddam had been killed. His body was not found among the rubble of his bombed palaces, and Iraqi officers captured by U.S. forces insisted that Saddam had escaped. The hunt for Saddam Hussein turned into a special operation carried out by Task Force 121, an elite unit composed of the finest soldiers from organizations like Delta Force, SEAL Team 6, the CIA, and other special units. With about 100 elite personnel, their ultimate mission was to capture the former Iraqi president and bring him to trial. In the spring of 2003, Task Force 121 began searching throughout Baghdad. From grand palaces to secret tunnels, they searched relentlessly for any trace of Saddam Hussein, but he appeared to have vanished without a clue. Realizing that obvious locations like palaces were not ideal hiding places for a man on the run, they adjusted their tactics. Task Force 121 teamed up with the 4th Infantry Division, focusing on capturing and interrogating high-ranking Iraqi military officers. At the same time, they deployed advanced technologies to support the operation. Apache helicopters equipped with advanced radar scanned for any suspicious movements on the ground. Any unusual activity, such as a vehicle speeding, triggered the task force to carry out checks. The 4th Infantry Division, also known as the Digital Division, due to its advanced technology, played a crucial role in the operation. Despite operating in an area almost devoid of wireless internet, they set up their own communication network. This system allowed continuous contact between units and the exchange of emails from their tanks and armored Humvees. Compared to the modern technology of today, this may seem primitive, but at the time this coordination was a significant step forward, providing essential support for the mission to capture Saddam Hussein. Many times the U.S. forces thought they were closing in on Saddam Hussein, but each time they got close, he managed to escape in extraordinary ways. Saddam never stayed in one location for more than a week, and sometimes he would change his hideout just hours after settling in, because he knew that if he was captured, a grim fate awaited him. On December 21st, 2003, one of Saddam Hussein's former allies unexpectedly betrayed him, providing the U.S. forces with information about a possible hideout. The very next day, around 300 to 400 soldiers from the 101st Airborne Division and Task Force 121 quickly surrounded a house in Al-Dor, near Tikrit, preparing for a decisive move in the operation to capture the dictator. When the U.S. forces approached their target, A fierce gunfight erupted that lasted for 4 hours. The intense battle left several members of Task Force 121 wounded. Eventually, the U.S. military used grenade launchers and rockets, especially the AT-4, to bring the fighting to an end. When the gunfire stopped, the soldiers rushed into the house, but an eerie silence greeted them. Saddam Hussein was not there. Instead, they found the bodies of Saddam's 2 sons, Uday and Qusay Hussein, his nephew Mustafa, and a bodyguard. While the main target had not been captured, this operation had removed important members from Saddam's inner circle, disrupting part of his support network. The hunt for Saddam Hussein was getting closer to dismantling his entire concealment system. The informant who revealed the location of Saddam's sons was Nawaf al-Zaydan, a close friend of the family, who received a reward of $30 million. This was part of a strategy to encourage Iraqis to provide information about Saddam's whereabouts. The U.S. government had previously offered a $25 million reward for anyone who could provide information leading to Saddam's capture. These rewards encouraged more Iraqis to come forward with what they knew, helping the U.S. forces gather more crucial leads. Meanwhile, the U.S. military continued to target high-ranking Iraqi officers, who were subjected to thorough interrogations. Intelligence experts meticulously examined computers, photos, mobile phones, and anything else that might contain valuable clues. Step by step, the search team reconstructed a network of individuals who had been involved in hiding Saddam Hussein. This network included direct family members such as his mother and sisters, distant relatives, servants, close friends, former bodyguards, neighbors from his hometown, and even his lovers. The list grew to hundreds of people, making the task of capturing Saddam seem almost impossible. In an interview, Lieutenant General Ricardo Sanchez, the commander of the coalition forces in Iraq, described the search as looking for a needle in a haystack. Yet in the midst of the desperation, the situation suddenly took an unexpected turn, marking a turning point in the operation to capture Saddam Hussein. In mid-November 2003, the search team made significant progress in their hunt. They captured several members from the families who had been hiding Saddam. During their interrogations, these individuals revealed the names of other Iraqis still loyal to the former president, bringing the U.S. forces closer to their goal. In the early hours of December 13, 2003, a tense atmosphere hung over the city of Tikrit. A special task force, including elite soldiers from Task Force 121 and the 4th Infantry Division, was summoned. They received orders to carry out a top-secret mission called Operation Red Dawn. Although they were only told they were hunting a high-value target, many in the team believed this could be their chance to capture Saddam Hussein. However, there were also several other high-profile targets on the list at the time. The operation was launched after intelligence identified 2 suspicious locations codenamed Wolverine 1 and Wolverine 2 near the city of Tikrit. Delta Forces C Squadron, along with Intelligence Support Agency, ISA, personnel, and the 1st Brigade Combat Team were tasked with carrying out the raid. Approximately 800 soldiers equipped with night vision goggles advanced towards the target area and began systematically searching each house. Initially, all efforts seemed futile, with no trace indicating that Saddam Hussein had been there. Frustration began to spread, and there were doubts that Saddam had been warned in time and managed to escape to another location. However, Colonel James Hickey, the commander of the operation, decided to maintain a secure perimeter around the farms at a safe distance. This decision was soon rewarded when the forces spotted 2 armed bodyguards attempting to flee from a small shack. It was later revealed that the farm belonged to Qais al-Namek, a close aide of Saddam Hussein. The 2 individuals who fled were Qais al-Namek's sons. After capturing them, the military approached the modest shack, which was hidden among fruit orchards and a sheep pasture. This shack would become the closest the search had come to reaching its dramatic conclusion. Inside the tiny shack was a scene of shocking poverty. The kitchen contained only a basic sink and stove with minimal food. The bedroom was sparse, with 2 beds, dirty clothes scattered everywhere, a few books, and a painting of Noah's Ark hanging on the wall. There was no proper bathroom, just a hole dug in the ground beside a simple shower head. But there was no sign of Saddam Hussein. As the soldiers were about to lose hope and prepare for extraction by helicopter, an unexpected event occurred. A soldier accidentally kicked a prayer rug on the dirt floor. Beneath the broken tiles and soil, they discovered a thin foam cover hiding a narrow, dark hole. There were faint sounds from within indicating someone was hiding. It was a spider hole, a small, well-camouflaged hiding spot, and the tension was palpable as the soldiers debated how to approach it safely. The person inside could be an armed bodyguard or even a suicide bomber. According to some reports, just as one soldier was about to throw a grenade into the hole, two hands suddenly rose from the darkness, signaling surrender. A man slowly emerged from the hole, his appearance starkly different from the once powerful dictator. His hair was disheveled, his beard gray and unkempt, his clothes filthy and smelling. However, no one on the team could mistake his identity. In broken English, he declared, "I am the president of Iraq, and I am willing to negotiate." After months of arduous searching, Saddam Hussein, who had once dominated the Middle East for 24 years, was finally captured in a dark, cramped hole, a stark contrast to the lavish palaces he had once inhabited. The hiding place was just 2.4 meters long and 1 meter wide, barely enough space to lie down in an uncomfortable position. The small bunker had only a tiny ventilation pipe and a small fan to circulate air, but it was still suffocating, filled with foul smells and insects. The man who had once lived in luxurious villas decorated with gold and diamonds was now forced to hide in such dark holes to survive. And in the end, everything came to an end. At 8:26 p.m., Saddam Hussein was officially captured. Less than an hour later, he was flown directly to the command center of Operation Red Dawn. Thereafter, his identity was conclusively confirmed. Saddam was transferred to Baghdad for further interrogation. Within hours, images of Saddam Hussein's capture spread around the world. In these photos, he was no longer the powerful, wealthy dictator he once was. Instead, he looked like a disheveled, gaunt man, a stark contrast to his previous image. The Pentagon declared Saddam Hussein a prisoner of war, citing his role as commander-in-chief of the Iraqi armed forces during the Gulf War. In 2004, his trial began, drawing global attention. 2 years later, the Iraqi High Tribunal convicted him of a series of crimes against humanity. He was sentenced to death, and on December 30th, 2006, Saddam Hussein was executed. His death marked a significant turning point in the history of Iraq and the Middle East, bringing an end to a bloody chapter of dictatorship. However, the event did not bring the stability many had hoped for. Instead, Iraq continued to spiral into deep political and social unrest. The weapons of mass destruction that the U.S. had cited as the primary justification for the invasion were never found, severely damaging America's credibility on the international stage. Saddam Hussein's death did not end the war in Iraq. Instead, the conflict escalated, particularly as Iraqi insurgent groups shifted to guerrilla tactics, turning the war into a long and nightmarish struggle for U.S. forces. Over the next 7 years, Iraq became the epicenter of violence and chaos. Brutal clashes claimed the lives of over 100,000 Iraqis and 4,400 American soldiers. The scars of war are still deeply etched in this land. Even today, Iraq continues to struggle to heal the immense social, political, and humanitarian wounds it sustained. Operation Red Dawn may have closed a painful chapter in history, but it also opened the door to even greater challenges for the country in the decades to come. The story of Saddam Hussein is a vivid testament to the downfall of a dictator who ruled through violence and repression for decades. While his capture and execution were seen as successes by the U.S. and its allies, but they raised serious questions about the legitimacy and consequences of the Iraq invasion. The failure to find weapons of mass destruction further underscored that the war was driven by a dubious rationale. After Saddam's death, Iraq remained mired in instability, demonstrating that toppling one individual does not address the root causes of a nation's problems. This story serves as both a historical lesson on the nature of power and decline and a stark reminder of the long-term consequences of war and military intervention. What are your thoughts on Saddam Hussein's life? Was the sentence he received justified? Liverpool in the 1980s was a city where violence and drugs thrived in its darkest corners, providing the perfect stage for a notorious criminal family to rise. Known as the Sopranos of Merseyside, the Fitz Gibbon family, led by the formidable Christine and her two sons, Ian and Jason, built a drug empire worth millions. operating right from their own home. But this is not just a tale of power and wealth. It is a blood-stained journey of relentless ambition, brutal conflict, and inevitable downfall. Christine Fitz Gibbon was not a mother to be loved, but one to be feared. She was the mastermind, the iron hand, and the ruthless force behind every operation in the family. Her ambitions far exceeded the boundaries of the law, and she had no qualms about dragging her two sons into a life of crime to achieve her goals. From a young age, Ian and Jason grew up surrounded by petty crime, a world crafted by their parents and those around them. Christine didn't just dream of a life of luxury, she demanded it, pushing her sons to become the tools of her aspirations. Before long, the two brothers dived headfirst into burglaries and thefts, quickly drawing the attention of the Liverpool police. Visits from law enforcement became a regular occurrence at the Fitz Gibbon household. But each time the police came knocking, Christine greeted them with unrelenting hostility. Her deep hatred for law enforcement seeped into Ian and Jason, shaping them into reckless, increasingly dangerous individuals. Mike Halligan, a veteran officer in Merseyside, recalled pulling over one of the Fitz Gibbon brothers for a routine check. Before I could even say anything, he went ballistic, yelling and threatening me, he said. Jason, the hot-headed older brother, seemed to revel in violence. His appetite for confrontation became a twisted hallmark of his personality. This aggression earned the Fitz Gibbon family notoriety, allowing them to expand their territory for selling cannabis. But cannabis was only the beginning. By the mid-1980s, Liverpool had earned the grim title of Drug City, with cheap brown heroin flooding its streets and deadly white powder making its way into lavish parties. This white powder, cocaine, became a symbol of affluence and quickly dominated the market. Liverpool's strategic position as a gateway from South America to Europe made it an ideal hub for drug trafficking. As demand for drugs soared across Europe in the 1990s, South American cartels turned Liverpool into a gold mine, smuggling millions of dollars worth of narcotics into the continent. Under Christine's iron-fisted leadership, Ian and Jason entered the more perilous arenas of the criminal underworld, transitioning from small-time cannabis dealers to prominent players in the cocaine trade. They embraced the illicit substance dubbed the king of the drug world. However, the path they chose was paved not just with wealth, but with blood. Rival factions soon emerged, drawing the Fitz Gibbon family into a relentless cycle of violence with no way out. The story of the Fitz Gibbon family is more than just a chronicle of crime. It's a grim portrait of corruption, unbridled ambition, and the heavy price of wielding illicit power. In Liverpool during the mid-1990s, a city rife with chaos and violence, criminal forces like the Fitz Gibbon family didn't just survive. They thrived under the ambitious leadership of their matriarch Christine. Brothers Ian and Jason Fitz Gibbon built a criminal empire that struck fear into the heart of the city. But their path was never smooth. It was painted with blood, territorial battles, and fierce resistance from the police. Starting as small-time cannabis dealers, Ian and Jason quickly transitioned to the royal commodity of the underworld, cocaine. Ian, the sharp-witted and strategic older brother, took on the role of mastermind, renowned for his negotiation skills and keen market insights. Meanwhile, Jason, hot-tempered and brutal, served as the enforcer, solving problems with fists rather than words. At the center of it all was Christine, the family's true boss, overseeing every move and ensuring their ascent to power and wealth. The family's rapid expansion inevitably drew attention, and soon a rival emerged, Curtis Warren, a notorious drug lord in Liverpool. Curtis was not only a competitor, but also the greatest threat to the Fitz Gibbon empire. Thus began a bloody feud between two titans of the criminal underworld. On May 1st, 1995, David Unge, a close ally of the Fitz Gibbons, was brutally murdered. Just 2 months earlier in March, David had bested one of Curtis Warren's men in a violent altercation, a victory that ultimately sealed his fate. David's death ignited a cycle of relentless retaliation. Liverpool descended into chaos. Swift attacks, public executions, and the collateral damage of innocent lives left the city in turmoil. Safety became a distant memory. The Liverpool police recognized that it was only a matter of time before one of these powerful factions was entirely destroyed. But then, Curtis Warren made an unexpected move, fleeing England for the Netherlands. His departure effectively handed control of Liverpool to Ian and Jason, cementing their position as undisputed rulers. However, the shine of power is never eternal. The Fitz Gibbon family expanded their operations further, frequently traveling to countries like Turkey, Colombia, Mexico, and Spain to establish relationships with major suppliers. This unchecked growth placed them squarely in the crosshairs of Merseyside police. A massive surveillance operation, the largest in Merseyside's history, was launched, targeting every member of the Fitz Gibbon family and their associates. True to their reputation, the Fitz Gibbons didn't back down. They brazenly confronted law enforcement, turning routine surveillance into tense standoffs. According to former officers, Ian and Jason would aggressively pursue agents, hurl threats, and even attempt to drag them from their surveillance vehicles. Despite their intimidation tactics, the police pressed on. In July 1999, when Ian and Jason traveled to London to meet with a Turkish crime syndicate, their every move was shadowed. Photographs from the operation captured Ian and Jason standing alongside the Turkish gang's leader and another accomplice holding a large bag. Upon investigation, the bag was found to contain heroin. The cost of power is never easy to bear. The Fitz Gibbons faced mounting pressure as law enforcement tightened its grip. Cracks in their once formidable empire began to show. Would they surrender to the inevitable, or would their response plunge Liverpool deeper into a vortex of violence? The fall of the Fitz Gibbon family, from dominance to destruction. In Liverpool, 1999, the Fitz Gibbon family, whose power had grown unchecked, finally faced a crushing blow from law enforcement. Following a series of large-scale raids, Ian, Jason, and 10 of their closest associates were arrested. The once feared figures who ruled Liverpool's underworld now stood before the courts. Ian was sentenced to 7 years in prison, while Jason received 8. It seemed as though this downfall would spell the end for their criminal empire. Yet, in 2006, upon their release, Ian and Jason wasted no time in returning to their illicit activities. This time, they weren't just looking to reclaim power. They sought to rebuild the Fitz Gibbon name as stronger and more sophisticated than ever. However, their newfound freedom was short-lived. British and Dutch authorities, recognizing the brothers' resurgence in international drug trafficking, joined forces to bring them to justice. Their communications were intercepted, and it wasn't long before Ian and Jason were arrested and extradited to the Netherlands in 2007. But the story didn't end there. At the same time that Ian and Jason faced the Dutch legal system, their greatest rival, Curtis Warren, had just been released after years in prison. Curtis's luck, however, was fleeting mere weeks after his release. He was rearrested in the Netherlands. Meanwhile, Ian and Jason caught a stroke of luck when their case in the Netherlands unexpectedly fell apart. Both brothers were released, leaving law enforcement frustrated once again. But freedom for the Fitz Gibbons came with no peace. Merseyside Police, in collaboration with the serious organized crime agency, SOCA, launched an unprecedented surveillance campaign against the family. This time, they targeted the heart of the operation, the Fitz Gibbon family home. A covert listening device was installed inside their Merseyside residence, allowing police to monitor every word spoken within those walls. It was as if law enforcement had secured a seat at the Fitz Gibbons' dinner table. The recordings revealed the dark inner workings of the family. Ian and Jason frequently argued over who was the true boss. Jason, ever arrogant, loudly proclaimed, "Anything he does, I do 10 times better." Their ambition and greed were laid bare in chilling detail. On one occasion, they even sang, "It's all about the money," in front of their mother, Christine, who presided over the table like a queen. The recordings exposed not just the family's ruthlessness, but also the hierarchy within their empire. Christine was undeniably in charge, while Ian and Jason fought for her approval. But arrogance often leads to fatal mistakes. In March 2011, Jason Fitz Gibbon's infamous temper once again revealed why he was the family's most feared member. After a failed car deal, Jason and an accomplice brutally assaulted Michael Scraggs, Akarsalisman, simply because he couldn't deliver the BMW X5 Jason wanted for his girlfriend. What seemed like a minor incident became a turning point. Merseyside police used this assault as the catalyst to ramp up their campaign. Not just to dismantle the Fitz Gibbon operation, but to obliterate the family's entire criminal empire. The Fitzgibbons' days of domination were numbered. By 2013, the police made a decisive move, marking the beginning of the end for one of Liverpool's most infamous crime families. It all stemmed from Jason's violent attack on Michael Scraggs. While the assault was reported to the authorities, the police chose not to act immediately. Instead, they waited for the perfect opportunity to strike a fatal blow, not just against Jason, but against the entire Fitzgibbon network. That opportunity came when authorities discovered the family's plans to import a massive shipment of heroin from Turkey. In coordination with Turkish police, an international operation was launched. The gang responsible for the transport was apprehended, and the entire heroin shipment was seized, a devastating blow to the Fitzgibbon empire. Jason Fitzgibbon was arrested in 2013 for his direct involvement in the failed heroin smuggling operation and the assault on Michael Scraggs. With Jason behind bars, law enforcement didn't stop there. Their next targets were Ian and the notorious matriarch of the family, Christine Fitzgibbon. In a dramatic early morning raid, police stormed the family's home in Merseyside. Inside the seemingly quiet residence, they uncovered over £182,000 in cash stuffed into plastic bags and hidden beneath the floorboards. This staggering sum laid bare the true nature of the Fitzgibbon empire. But what shocked investigators even more was the revelation that Christine, the criminal mastermind herself, had been boldly claiming unemployment benefits and other social welfare payments amounting to approximately £1,500 per month. She lived a double life, both a queen of the criminal underworld and a supposedly struggling citizen. The law finally caught up with the Fitzgibbon family. Ian received a 16-year prison sentence. Jason was handed 14.5 years for his role in the drug trafficking conspiracy, and Christine was sentenced to 2 years for money laundering. Once arrogant rulers of Liverpool's underworld, the Fitzgibbons were now forced to face the full weight of justice. In 2021, Ian and Jason were released early under strict supervision. However, just a year later, both were rearrested for breaching restricted areas, despite no new criminal activities being reported. As for Christine, her release from prison did not seem to mark the end of her association with the criminal world. Recently, she was spotted at Liverpool Crown Court, accompanying her grandson, Ian Fitzgibbon Jr., who was facing charges for cannabis trafficking. Does this signal the rebirth of the Fitzgibbon empire? This time under a new generation? The future remains uncertain, but history has shown one thing. Wherever the Fitzgibbon family goes, chaos and intrigue are never far behind. What do you think of this story? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe to support the channel. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.